Oh, I don't know what it's like where you guys are, but it's freezing here. Let's talk about reverb. Okay guys, so welcome to the video. Today we're going to be discussing another key core effect that we use within our mixing arsenal. Jumping across, I'm just going to get straight into it today. We are going to be using the same drum sample, but I'm looking at actually using a kick this time. Using a snare instead of a kick this time. Classic. And I've already got a reverb plugin on here. Essentially what reverb is it's the sound of putting your audio within a room, okay? And you can adjust the parameters of that room and make it as small as a shoebox or as gigantic as a airplane hangar, okay, or a church cathedral or whatever else. There are different types of reverb. Over the years, people have developed different technologies to emulate the sound of reverb without having to use a physical room. Apart from the obvious digital plugins, there are hardware versions such as plate reverbs, or in your guitar amps, if you've got an older guitar amp, you may have a spring reverb, which is a chamber with a spring in it. And those are just some of the different ways that we can produce reverb without having to actually put a speaker in a room and then record the sound of that room with the speaker playing the audio in it. So jumping across here, I've got our snare sample. I'm just going to turn our mix all the way down so that it's completely dry. So this is just the snare sound. Okay, so now this is just all on the default parameters. I'm going to turn the mix all the way up so that you can hear the reverb. Right, so that's completely wet, as we call it. So instead of completely dry, which is the completely dry snare signal, we're now hearing the fully wet signal, which is completely reverb. When we're using a digital emulation of an effect like a reverb or an EQ on the track itself, rather than as a separate send, we want to be mindful of how much of the mix control we want to use, okay? So I'll play it back again, and I'm going to slowly blend in the reverbed signal. So around about here, we're getting a nice, subtle sort of sound. Then about a halfway blend between both. And then we can really crank it up. Notice how when we crank up past a certain point, it almost sounds like the signal is getting more and more distant, right? It's the same sort of concept in, you know, how the real world works. If there's more reverb, then, and you haven't got the dry signal there to help back it up, the source audio is going to sound more and more distant, like it's getting further and further away in a gigantic hall or room or whatever else, okay? I'm going to show you guys a couple of the other settings in here, starting off with the room size. So I'm going to go completely wet, and I'm going to play around with the room size, showing you guys the difference between having a gigantic room, like a, once again, cathedral, airport hangar type deal, and then wind it back to a tight, smaller space. So here, there, it's especially getting tighter, I'm going to turn it all the way up again. There isn't as much tail, it sort of clamps down a bit more. And to the point where there's not actually too much reverb. Going to turn the room back up so you can hear. It's essentially what it sounds like. As the room size gets smaller, the amount of reverb diminishes, and gets tighter and tighter. Okay. The other one I wanted to play around with is the reverb time up here. So at the moment it defaults to 1.9 seconds. I'm going to have the room size all the way up, and I'm going to do a similar sort of thing. Start with the reverb time all the way down, and then turn it up and up. At a certain point, it's going to not stop, and I'm just going to end up with a permanent gigantic reverb. Well, I'm fairly sure that's what's going to happen. So let's have a listen to that. Now, so notice that is different to the room size, okay? It's essentially the amount of signal that is, feeding back and producing the amount of reverb, not the actual room size. So just to show that they are different, to demonstrate, I'm going to turn the room size right down and do the same test with the reverb time to show you guys the difference. Oh, different part. And setting it back to just a normal reverb again. The balance is essentially playing around with how much tail you actually want and how that shapes that. So I'll quickly show you guys a little bit of that as well. I'll get this reverb really cranking and then adjust this here. So those are the sort of basic functions that you'll find on pretty much all the reverbs. There are other functions within here, such as a couple of filters, okay? A lot of the other plugins and stuff might not have these, okay? But I'll show you guys the basics anyway, since we've already talked about EQ. It's essentially just using that again. So that's down here. We have a high frequencies and a low frequencies. And we can choose how much to roll off and cut within those. So I'll just do a basic demonstration around the cutting of the frequencies. This one already defaults to a cut of 9.46 kilohertz. So I'll start by cranking it up and then rolling it down. Hear that high end come back in as soon as I put that up. So same as our EQ video, we've just really filtered off that high end. And then we've got our low frequencies here. This will be the same sort of thing. Sorry, I was expecting that to be a cut as well, but I realised we've got a cut there. This one isn't a cut. This is essentially choosing a particular frequency to feed back on. So if I go to 2 kilohertz and then crank the time up, you'll hear what happens. There we go. And then we can produce a bit of a cut by rolling that time back. I'm assuming we can do the same thing here with this one. Right. And then we have some different width controls. Let's have a little bit of a play around. Just have a listen to that. Can hear as I bring the width back, it does sound a lot more direct. If it was a stereo signal, or if I was putting a stereo reverb on the mono signal, you'd hear that sort of wider separation. I think that is pretty much it for your reverb, and you can sort of hear how you can use it for a lot of different applications, either completely transforming your signal to create something very different, very fresh, or just adding a little bit of room, air, and nuance. Side note, a lot of what reverb does is, as well as just putting it in a room, it creates those reflections and sort of smooths out your sound altogether, okay? Also why when people sing in the shower, they think that they sound good at singing when in the real world they might not actually be all that handy. It's because reverb smooths out all the mistakes, honestly, and makes it a lot more bearable. Also why if you ever go to a karaoke bar, you'll notice there's a hell of a lot of reverb on the microphone there. Okay, that's all for this video, guys. Tune in for the next one. Have a good one. Bye.